Candid dialogue. North Korea says it's willing to talk nuclear disarmament with the U.S. We have the latest. Not backing down. The president says he's sticking to his tariff plan, despite concerns from leaders in his own party. Venezuela in chaos. An expert weighs in on the refugee crisis. And October honor? Reports point to when Pope Paul VI could be declared a saint. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 6, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump points at possible progress in talks between North and South Korea. It comes as North Korea says it is willing to talk with the U.S. The president says it may be a false hope, but the U.S. is ready to go hard in either direction. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The president and high-ranking State Department officials here are cautious tonight. They know it would take a lot for North Korea to give up their nuclear ambitions, but the U.S. is giving credit to its ally, South Korea, for making a serious effort to negotiate with their communist neighbors. North Korean state television airs video today of leader Kim Jong-un meeting a delegation from South Korea in Pyongyang. It's the first time South Korean officials have met the reclusive leader in person since he took power after his father's death in 2011. President Trump reacted on Twitter, saying possible progress being made in talks with North Korea. For the first time in many years, a serious effort is being made by all parties concerned. The world is watching and waiting. Maybe false hope, but the U.S. is ready to go hard in either direction. President Moon Jae-in of South Korea tells military cadets in Seoul he's working towards a diplomatic solution to the long-standing conflict. But he says the country must be prepared against the North's nuclear and missile threats.
I'm quite skeptical about all of this.
Daniel Coates, the National Intelligence Director, striking a less optimistic tone when asked about the talks during a Senate hearing today.
We know that Kim Jong-un is, while he's unpredictable, he's also very calculating. We know that he views possession of nuclear weapons as essential to his well-being as well as the well-being of his nation.
Coates and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Robert Ashley, say North Korea remains a critical threat.
I think the big change that we've seen from his father to Kim Jong-un is the rigor of training. Prior with his father, you did not have the level of discipline, you did not have the level of rigor that we would normally associate for what you do to get a force ready to go to war.
State Department officials say it's important the U.S. remain firm in its resolve. Spokesperson Heather Nauert spoke this afternoon saying that they in the White House will remain coordinated with their South Korean partners in terms of any possible negotiation. They say in the meantime, the goal is to continue to apply economic and diplomatic pressure until they're able to see the North actually take concrete steps toward denuclearization. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Republican leaders beg President Trump to abandon plans for broad tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. But some Democrats and union leaders seem happy. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Republicans say Trump's tough tariffs could lead to Americans paying more for things like appliances, cars, and even beer. And other countries warn they'll retaliate, but President Trump says he's not backing down.
25 for steel, 10 for aluminum.
The president's pledge of steep tariffs on imported steel and aluminum is stunning European leaders. The European Union threatens taxes on American products as revenge.
We will not sit idly while our industry is hit with unfair measures that put thousands of European jobs at risk.
In the face of a possible trade war, many Republicans urge the president to retreat.
I'm concerned because I'm not sure that's the way to go in a free market economy. But then again, you know, the president has his reasons for this, and some of them are pretty valid.
The Beer Institute, representing major brewers, warns the tariffs could cost the industry $340 million a year. Some Republicans say the president should take a more surgical approach and focus on particular products and problem countries.
We could give our steel companies and our aluminum companies the breathing room that many of them do need. By the same token, not have the impact downstream on people that process steel and on consumers.
But Ohio Democrat Sherrod Brown praises the president's protectionism.
I support the idea of aggressive trade enforcement, and I think that was generally the right thing to do.
You're going to hit back at us. Isn't that going to hurt people back at home?
Well, the fact is we don't stand up. We've lost far too many jobs in places like Mansfield, Ohio, and Youngstown, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio. And I think someplace you draw the line and said, yes, we're a country that believes in the rule of law.
Speaker Ryan says he's encouraged the White House may reconsider its blanket tariffs on steel and aluminum. Republicans are suggesting ways to stop the tariffs if put into place. The White House officials say they'll make them official in 2 weeks. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Joining us now via Skype is Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor to Trump's presidential campaign and a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for coming on the program, Steve.
It's my pleasure.
How are these tariffs going to help or hurt regular Americans, especially if, as being reported, it could lead to a trade war?
Well, a trade war would be obviously a terrible thing for everyone in every country, because it would mean higher tariffs and higher prices of goods and services. And we don't want to see a shutdown or a slowdown of the global trading system. Now, I don't think that's likely to happen. But I think on balance, what Donald Trump has proposed with these steel and aluminum tariffs is negative for the American economy. We've seen the stock market react in a very negative way. A lot of the manufacturing companies in America that produce things that are produced with steel, whether it's the auto industry or the producers of Harley Davidsons or the producers of vans and trucks and the producers of manufactured heavy equipment like Caterpillar, they are negatively affected because they use steel and aluminum in what they produce. So on balance, I think the effect is negative. I think Trump has his heart in the right place here. He wants to help those steel and aluminum workers, but I don't think it's going to work.
Let's talk about what you said in an op-ed in the National Review. Quote, even if tariffs save every one of the 140,000 or so steel jobs in America, they put at risk 5 million jobs in industries that use steel. However, the CEO of Timken Steel met with the president, and he told CNBC that he supports these tariffs. So will the tariffs help keep steel jobs in America or not?
Maybe a little bit. Sure. If you make foreign steel more expensive, then obviously domestic steel is more competitive in the short term. But what I would say to the steel workers and to the steel mill owners is, look, what's really caused the biggest drop in steel employment is the fact that the factories are much more capital intensive now, and automation, robotics have totally changed the way steel is made. I remember when I was a kid in the late 1960s, early 70s, my parents took me to visit a steel mill, and there were thousands of workers in these sweatshops, and now a modern steel mill has 1/10 as many workers and produces.
My grandfather was one of them.
Steel.
My grandfather was one of them at Mesta Steel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Before we go, isn't the real reason that the president is pushing for tariffs because he really wants to renegotiate NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement? Didn't he come out and say, all right, here we go, tariffs, hard, and then saying, well, might not be that way, let's renegotiate NAFTA?
Well, what is the name of Trump's best-selling book? The Art of the Deal.
Art of the Deal. It's a negotiation tactic, isn't it?
I do believe so, and I think he will use this as a way to maybe negotiate a better deal for America and NAFTA. And if he can do that, I'm all for it. But he's playing a bit of a dangerous game here, because now you have a lot of other countries saying, well, if you're not going to buy our steel, we're not going to necessarily buy your Harley Davidsons or your blue jeans.
Agriculture products.
Right, exactly. So I want to see a de-escalation, not an escalation,
okay.
and we will see.
Thank you so much, Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign, distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Come back anytime.
Thank you.
Senator Thad Cochran, a Republican from Mississippi, is retiring next month. The 80-year-old says he's stepping down because of his health. He is the 10th longest-serving senator in history. Cochran joined Congress in 1978. This means that there are now 35 seats up for grabs in the midterm elections. Voters in Texas are casting ballots in a slate of closely watched primary races, the first in the country. The results could yield clues for how the midterm elections in November will play out. In the Lone Star State, Democrats are running in 36 congressional races for the first time in 25 years. The Office of Special Counsel is accusing White House aide Kellyanne Conway of violating the Hatch Act. The measure is designed to stop certain members of the government from engaging in political activity. A new report says Conway mixed official government business with political views during last year's Alabama Senate race. The Office of Special Counsel is unrelated to the Russia investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. A former Trump campaign aide lashes out at the president in a series of TV interviews. He also tells CNN President Trump's approval rating would be much higher if he and his mentor, Roger Stone, were at the White House.
So any of them to criticize me, I could tell you, if Roger and me were in there, Trump would be at 55%.
Today, Sam Nunberg says he will probably cooperate with the special counsel investigating the possible Russian collusion. Yesterday, he said he would not do so and added Robert Mueller could just arrest him. The embattled Secretary of Veterans Affairs announces the launch of a telehealth program to help veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. The administration is still defending him and highlighting the, quote, good work of the VA. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports on the program that will help millions who have served our country. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The announcement comes as questions continue here at the White House about VA Secretary David Shulkin and his reported abuse of taxpayer dollars. Today, Secretary Shulkin focused on this VA program that uses technology like phone and interactive video to deliver therapy to remote areas. He says it will help end a cycle of veteran suicide.
Most important is to work with our partners to outreach to veterans who are in need of help, because we know that mental health care saves lives and we can do more.
Shulkin says suicide prevention is his top priority at the VA. He says this initiative will save vets the time and effort getting to a VA facility far from their homes.
Secretary Shulkin has done a great job.
The White House remains confident in Shulkin after a report from the VA Inspector General last month found Shulkin improperly accepted Wimbledon tennis tickets, and at taxpayer expense, his wife accompanied him on a European trip. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the White House continues to review the Inspector General's report.
Secretary Shulkin has repaid, I know, several $1,000s towards some of the travel costs of the trip that was in question. And we're continuing to focus on a lot of the great work that's taking place at the VA while that's still under review.
When the report first came out, Secretary Shulkin denied any wrongdoing. He has since conceded mistakes in the handling of the European trip. It hasn't been uncommon for this White House to get questions from the press about the president's level of confidence in cabinet secretaries and White House staff. There has been turnover. Most recently, last week, his trusted advisor, Hope Hicks, resigned. The president calls the reports of chaos in the White House a fake news narrative. Today, he tweeted, "People will always come and go," adding, "I still have some people that I want to change." He finished by saying, "There is no chaos, only great energy." Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Sri Lanka's president declares a state of emergency amid anti-Muslim violence. The announcement comes after Buddhist mobs burned at least 11 Muslim-owned shops and homes in the center of the country. Government officials say they will, quote, act sternly against groups inciting religious hatred. According to the CIA, Sri Lanka is about 70% Buddhist. And we move on to Myanmar, another country religious freedom experts are watching closely. A UN official says it's impossible for Rohingya refugees to return safely. The Muslim minority is taking refuge in migrant camps in Bangladesh. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya have fled Myanmar because of alleged ethnic cleansing. A former Russian spy and his daughter are found slumped on a bench in Salisbury, England, after allegedly being poisoned. Sergei Skripal spied on his country for Britain. Police there suggest Russia is behind the sudden illness. Russian officials deny that allegation, and if true, though, it could affect British participation at the Soccer World Cup in Russia this summer. Cardinal George Pell appears in an Australian court for the second day. He's on trial on sexual abuse charges. His lawyers say there was a presumption of guilt among police who investigated the claims. They highlight 21 witness statements that are favorable to Cardinal Pell, who is the Vatican's finance minister. He denies all charges. Coming up, the refugee crisis in Venezuela as more people flee the socialist country. And school safety bill. Lawmakers in Florida passed new legislation following last month's deadly school shooting. Leaders in Latin America mark the 5th anniversary of the death of former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. The country faces a deepening economic crisis and widespread food shortages. Current President Nicolas Maduro calls Chavez his political father, and he says he's carrying on the socialist revolution begun by his mentor. Maduro faces an election in May. Joining me now is Moises Rendon, a Latin American policy expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies right here in Washington and a native of Venezuela. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invitation, Lauren.
Thousands, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans are pouring out of the country into Colombia. There's no food. There's no medicine. People are losing enormous amounts of weight. They can't feed their children. Isn't this enough for the worldwide community to do something? UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says we've seen Venezuela go from what was a successful democratic country to being ruled by an abusive dictator. Tell us what's happening. Describe their pain.
Yeah, no, thank you. In fact, Venezuela was a sophisticated country back in the 20th century. But since Hugo Chavez took over in 2000, we've seen the country really going into a total collapse from economic, social, politically point of view. Institutions do not exist in Venezuela. The current president, Nicolas Maduro, controls all the institutions. And that's really the root cause of the humanitarian crisis that we've seen, is Maduro's policies.
Last month, you were in Colombia to see the refugees coming out and to find out what is happening. Let's take a look at the video that you took here. Describe to us what you saw.
It was really a calamity. And as you can see, there's people crossing to Venezuela back and forth. 2 days before we arrived, the number hit a high of 91,000 people crossing.
For the day?
For one day, only one day.
1 day?
Yes.
What's the average?
The average is about 50,000. And these are numbers coming from Migración Colombia, the authority.
So you talked to Catholic bishops. The country is 70% Catholic, according to the State Department. How are Catholic bishops in this area trying to help all of these refugees?
Yeah, out of all the meetings that I have in Colombia, the most impressive was the Bishop Victor Ochoa. He really is doing an impressive job on trying to just provide meals to poor Venezuelans who are crossing to the country. They're desperate, thin Venezuelans who haven't eaten for days. So when they see the bishop and the center, the distribution meal center that they have had on the border, is really a big relief for many mothers, for many children, and for many people.
Pope Francis met with Maduro in October of last year and called for an end to this crisis. We're still seeing this. As a policy expert, what can be done?
The pressure needs to increase significantly on Maduro, on the Maduro regime. And I think the OEAS, which is a regional organization, is doing a good job, but it needs to be accompanied by other countries too. Colombia needs to play a stronger role in increasing that pressure. The U.S. also, the UN. We really, when you come to Venezuelan crisis, there is not a silver bullet. You need all the elements that can increase pressure on Venezuela. And as you mentioned, that we have upcoming presidential elections, and this is a time to do it as the humanitarian crisis deepens and deepens by the day.
I had read that it was in April and had been moved up. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, okay.
Now it's in May.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
You are so welcome. Moises Rendon for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy announces a vote on a school safety bill. It would provide grants to improve security, but does not include gun control. Florida's state Senate has approved a law that raises the age to buy firearms from 18 to 21. It establishes a 3-day waiting period for most gun purchases and bans bump stocks. The legislation also establishes a program to train teachers to carry concealed weapons to school. A statue of St. Junipero Serra is being removed from downtown San Francisco after some say it is racist. The city's Arts Commission voted unanimously to get rid of the 19th century sculpture. It depicts the Catholic saint and Sir Francis Drake with a Native American. The statue stood near City Hall. Pope Francis canonized Serra here in Washington, D.C. in 2015. Lawmakers in West Virginia propose ending Medicaid funding for abortions. The bill passed the state's House and Senate and will go before voters in November. Supporters say abortions would remain legal, but the state would not have to pay for them. The U.S. bishops are urging the faithful to flood Congress with emails and calls to protect conscience rights. They say, quote, increasing and fierce attacks on conscience rights regarding abortion cry out for an immediate remedy. The Conscious Protection Act would protect healthcare workers from having to perform abortions. The bishops want lawmakers to include it in a spending bill that is needed to keep the government open. The day to call is Monday, March 12th. Up next, honoring Paul VI, a report from Rome on the legacy of the former pope. And going overboard, a record-breaking discovery washes up on the shore in Australia.
Il cuore contrito, chi dice la verità al Signore? Io ho fatto questo, Signore.
At his daily Mass, Pope Francis says, God will forgive our sins, but only if we forgive others. The Holy Father adds, when you trust in God, you are never disappointed. A Vatican official says Pope Paul VI will likely be made a saint in October, although nothing is official yet. Pope Paul VI was born Giovanni Battista Montini and was head of the church from 1963 to 1978. The Italian pontiff led the church through the close of the Second Vatican Council. Paul VI is best known for his encyclical Humanae Vitae, and that letter reaffirmed the church's opposition to artificial birth control. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, tell us more about Pope Paul VI and why the church is going to canonize him.
Let's perhaps first point out, Lauren, that it's important to note that canonization reflects the holiness of a person. So it's not just because he was Pope that he's being canonized, as was the case with John Paul II or John the 23rd. He managed to lead the church, let's say, after Vatican II in a very prayerful manner. He was able to steer the church through very turbulent times of social unrest and upheaval. And he succeeded in implementing the council in a very faithful and prayerful manner.
Well, let's talk about Humanae Vitae. It's the 50th anniversary. And what is his legacy on that front?
Well, if you look at it 50 years on, you could almost call him perhaps a prophet, because he was a true prophet. He anticipated so many of the problems that are taking place now in the world regarding contraceptive culture, regarding also, if you want, the declining fertility rates, the objectivization of women, if you want, and the loss of dignity. And they're all perhaps a result of what Paul VI saw as the fruits of the sexual revolution that was taking place during the 1960s when Vatican Council II was taking place.
The timing of his canonization seems to be significant with this 50th anniversary.
Well, the canonization is expected to take place at the end of October this year, which would come at the end of the Synod of Bishops. Now, it was Pope Paul VI himself who established the Synod, so it is perhaps very fitting, and it's a fitting testimony to him, that his canonization would take place just then. And this Synod is dedicated to the youth, and it's poignant because he was very concerned about young people. He was very concerned about, if you want, even peace in the world. And we will remember very well his address to the UN General Assembly in New York, and also his encyclical that he wrote in '67 called Populorum Progressio. So it is indeed significant that his canonization is expected at the end of October, at the end of the Synod of Bishops.
Thank you so much for your insight into Pope Paul VI. Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Our partners at the Catholic News Agency have more on the possible canonization. You can go there right now at catholicnewsagency.com. A cardinal in Italy has a message that's ringing in the ears of priests. He tells them not to be on their cell phones while hearing confession. He has to say that, really? His advice is in response to reports of some priests chatting on social media during the sacrament. I hope that's not while I'm in confession. Okay, sorry. And finally tonight, from cell phones to a much slower form of communication, one that took 132 years to deliver. The world's oldest message in a bottle was found on a remote beach near Perth, Australia. It dates from 1886 and was launched by the captain of a German ship. The bottles were part of a campaign to figure out currents and more efficient shipping routes. Now here, I was hoping that it was a love letter. No love letter, I love you so much. No, this is just, hey, what's the shipping route? All right. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.